So welcome everyone. Great to see you all here. Great to see so many people here today. So thank you for joining us. Welcome, of course, to the inaugural James Martin Institute Oration. And we'll be welcoming shortly the Honourable Dominic Perrottet MP, Premier of New South Wales, who will be joining us to give a headland speech on education as this year's James Martin Institute Oration. Now, I'm Barney Glover. I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University, so it's a particular welcome to have you here in the Peter Shergold building, 1 Parramatta Square, and it's always a delight when the namesake of the building is sitting in the front row. So on behalf of the University, I'm delighted to welcome you all here to the Peter Shergold building. I want to begin, of course, on behalf of the University by acknowledging that today's meeting is being held on the country of the Barramatical people of the Darug Nation, and to acknowledge their ancestors who have been the traditional owners of their country for tens of thousands of years. Western Sydney University also wishes to acknowledge and pay our respects to elders past and present, and a particular welcome to anyone of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who happens to be with us in the audience today. Now, it is a very important occasion, and great to see so many people here. We're almost bursting at the seams, which is great. But we also have a number of distinguished guests, which I did want to specifically welcome, particularly the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, MLC, the Minister for Education and Early Learning. We'll hear from the Minister shortly. Datuk Dr. Edmund Santhara, the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture from Malaysia. Great to have international visitors with us today as well. Professor Hugh Durrant-White, the New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer. Paul Daniel, the Deputy CEO of NESA. Gillian Siegel, AO, the Chair of the Sir John Monash Foundation. The Right Reverend Chris Edwards, the Bishop of North Sydney. Professor John Hattie, a great name in educational policy in this country, Director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute. Professor Emma Johnston, DVC Research, very newly minted DVC Research at the University of Sydney. Great to see the University of Sydney here. And of course, representing the JMI, an acronym we'll grow to know and love, Professor Peter Shergold, the Chair of the Board, of course, of the James Martin Institute, and Libby Hackett, who is the CEO, and you'll hear more from both shortly. Some quick housekeeping tasks, and we are now officially bursting at the seams. Well done. To the JMI. The bathroom facilities are just outside in the foyer, easy to find. Now, there isn't a fire drill today, so importantly, if the alarm rings, it is legitimately a fire. So staff at the end of the room will direct you to the evacuation area, or just follow me. I think that would be the easiest exit. Now, turn off your phones, or at least turn them to silent, because we'd like you to keep them out and use them silently to reference the JMI Twitter handle at JMI Public Policy, which I believe is on the screen. Yes, it is. And to tweet during the course of today's oration. Now, there are cameras in the room, as you'll see. The event is being live streamed and recorded for viewing, no doubt, off the JMI website at a later date. Now, it's a busy agenda for today, so I'll quickly work through that. We'll in a moment hear from Professor Peter Shergold, the Chair of the James Martin Institute. Then we'll have some opening remarks by the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, the Minister for Education and Early Learning. Then, of course, our headland speech on education by the Premier. That'll be followed by a Q&A session facilitated by Libby. And following the Q&A, there'll be an opportunity to stay and enjoy a light and nice networking lunch. So I look forward to that. Now, it's my pleasure to actually invite Professor Peter Shergold AC, Chair of the James Martin Institute for Public Policy, and of course the Chancellor of Western Sydney University, to deliver the welcome address. We have no time to do Peter's bio because that would be impossible. I will not do justice to it, but it is important, Peter. Hold back for a moment. Peter has had, of course, a distinguished career, having held roles as an academic and in the public service. From 2003 to 2008, Secretary of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and as the nation's most senior public servant. Prior to that, Secretary of the Department of Education, Science and Training, Secretary of the Department of Employment, Workplace Relations, Small Business, Between 95 and 98, Peter was the Commissioner of the Australian Public Service, where he established the Office of Multicultural Affairs. He served as CEO of Comcare and CEO of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission in the early 1990s. Currently, of course, chairs the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, the Centre for Social Impact, and serves on the board of the General Sir John Monash Foundation. Peter, of course, was awarded an AM for public service in 1996, in 2003, the Centenary Medal 2007. He was awarded, of course, a Companion of the Order of Australia for service to the community. Please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Shergold.
So thank you, Barney. I am delighted to welcome all of you to this important occasion hosted by the James Martin Institute and with the great support of Western Sydney University. So I'm Peter Shergold, the person, not the building, and I am honoured to chair the Institute. And let me explain why. As Barney has said, for 20 years, I was an academic teaching at UNSW, but also at Penn State and LSE. I was an economic historian, a social scientist. And then quite unexpectedly, I changed career direction and spent 20 years as a senior executive in the Australian Public Service. And as Barney has said, it included a period as Secretary of the Department of Education, and then moving from that position to spend 5 years as Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Now, in that capacity, I often expressed my frustration privately and on at least 2 occasions publicly about how so much valuable research undertaken by Australia's publicly funded universities was having so little impact on the design or evaluation of public policy. In my words, too much academic research was getting lost in translation. Those academics who undertake work in health and medicine do rather better at exerting influence on government. Those who work in science, and particularly the social sciences and the liberal arts, do rather worse in impacting government decisions. There have been occasions, when research undertaken in higher education has had a profoundly significant impact. Think, for example, of the work undertaken by Bruce Chapman at ANU on income contingent loans that led to HECS, that led to fee help, which was the basis of funding a huge expansion in students gaining access to higher education. But unfortunately, those tend to be the exceptions. Sadly, such instances are too much the exception. I think the reasons are clear enough. In terms of politicians, well, I have to say, Minister, that politicians, quite understandably, are often attracted by policy-based evidence research that lends support to a policy direction that's already been set. And the reasons for that are clear. Ministers, every minister I've ever known, is time poor. The pressure on them is huge. They need the means to better and more easily access research that can influence their change agenda. And then public servants? Well, public servants, and I was one for 20 years, use their situational authority to mediate their presentation of evidence-based policy to the ministers they serve. Their skills, I think my skill, was in conceptualizing and analyzing and synthesizing research in a succinct and readable and persuasive fashion, whether that research came from universities or from think tanks or from large consultancy companies. And the fact is that too rarely do those who actually undertake the research get the opportunity to present and argue it directly to ministers, directly to governments. The fact is that non-partisan public servants work in an environment of political contest. And I was, a professional compromiser at heart. You need to be in order to exert influence. They will perhaps willingly, perhaps sometimes more grudgingly, accept a second-best solution to a wicked policy challenge, rather than getting no solution at all. And then academics, well, academics, and I mean those academics who choose to work in areas that are relevant to contemporary public policy, academics have an understandable hesitation that operating in the world of political negotiation might end up undermining their integrity. Too often, I'd have to say, academics find it rather easier to criticise from the sidelines, and from that position hope, indirectly, to influence the framework of public discourse. And that perspective is reinforced when they perceive that the publication of their findings in international peer-reviewed journals affords them greater kudos and does more to enhance their career prospects than turning that research, translating that research into evidence for public policy. It's changing. All universities, and Western Sydney is a leader in this, are spending far more time on working with academics, encouraging them to translate their research, where it's relevant, into public advocacy. But overall, you'd have to say, put that together, and what a waste. So much university research is highly relevant to the economic and social and cultural decisions that governments make, and yet has limited impact on the decision makers. Indeed, unless public servants or consultancy companies have discovered the research and interpreted its value for public policy, it's quite likely that ministers will never know the range of evidence that is available in universities to help them make decisions, to help them set policy directions with eyes wide open. So what can be done? Well, in New South Wales, an extraordinarily bold decision was taken by the Gladys Berejiklian and Dominic Perrottet governments, and its boldness was exemplified by its common sense simplicity. The approach is based upon the most fundamental of principles: collaboration. Collaboration to create a means by which academics can partner with ministers, with ministerial advisors, with public servants, in seeking to find solutions to the manifold challenges that face Australian democratic governance. And that means has taken shape in the James Martin Institute. Now, of course, we're presently with Libby in our early days. We're relatively small, but we've got the capacity, we've certainly got the desire to grow to greater scale. But already, and I say this quite seriously, the James Martin Institute, established by the New South Wales government, represents a world-leading approach, an innovative approach to harnessing academic research excellence for the creation of public benefit. The New South Wales government put $10 million in as a corpus. And then 3 universities, Western Sydney, the University of Sydney, and UTS, have agreed to match that financial investment. And those financial and in-kind resources are now funding a genuinely partnership approach. Our methodology recognises the different perspectives of governments and parliaments and public administrators and academics, but provides each of those parties with the means, no more than that, with the motivation to work in closer harmony. The James Martin Institute has been created as an independent and non-partisan policy institute to promote public policy that is informed by the world-leading research undertaken in our universities. And how? In essence, by bringing academic experts into policy making at the formative stages, with the explicit intention of finding practical and pragmatic solutions. The Institute seeks to create a neutral space in which governments and parliaments and public servants and academics work together, and importantly, to have them work collectively alongside experts from business, experts from civil society, experts, as here, from education. and to do so in order to embrace creative problem identification and problem solving for public purpose. But how? Well, how exactly? Well, first, by ensuring that governments can frame the problems that they are seeking to address, and directly or through their public servants work together with academics who have deep research knowledge in those areas of interest. And this approach, if you think about it, does not place restrictions on the free exercise of academic inquiry, but it does bring to government ideas, practically oriented ideas, that can help governments to inform their decisions without constraining the political flexibility that government needs. And second, the Institute works by engaging academics at both the design of the questions and the development of answers in a mutually respectful collaboration with governments and with their public servants. And that involves applying academic know-how to identifying policy options, to co-designing and co-delivering solutions, and to communicating the nature of societal problems and how they might be addressed to the wider public. And to bring this about by undertaking joint projects, by undertaking interactive workshops, by funding policy-oriented research, and by promoting a wide and diverse range of policy-oriented inquiry. So, for the James Martin Institute, the chance, Minister, the chance to host this important event with our 3 university partners in front of so many educational experts from public and independent and Catholic schools is one that we very much appreciate. We strongly welcome the opportunity to bring together academics and public servants with the Premier and with you, Minister for Education and Early Learning. The opportunity to hear your thoughts on education policy. And as we listen, to imagine how the James Martin Institute, working with the educational sector, can stimulate research-based evidence to contribute to the framing and delivery of government policy in this profoundly important area in the months and years ahead. Thank you so much for honouring us with your presence.
Thank you so much, Professor Shergold, for those introductory comments and setting the scene for the great work of the James Martin Institute now and into the future. Small at the moment, but with an incredible opportunity to influence public policy in New South Wales and more broadly. Now, I am delighted to invite the Honourable Sarah Mitchell MLC, Minister for Education and Early Learning, to deliver some opening remarks. Now, since entering Parliament in 2011, Minister Mitchell has served on numerous committees, including as Parliamentary Secretary for Regional and Rural Health and for Western New South Wales. In 2017, Minister Mitchell was appointed to the ministry as the Minister for Early Childhood Learning, Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Assistant Minister for Education. She is the leader of the New South Wales Nationals in the Upper House and Deputy Leader of the Government in the Upper House. The Minister has spent most of her life living in northwest New South Wales. Her interest in politics began when she was school captain at Gunnedah High School, when she met John Anderson, her local MP at the time and the leader of the National Party. Sarah then moved to Sydney to study politics and international relations, very appropriately at the University of New South Wales. Sarah served as President of the Federal Young Nationals for 2 years and State Chairman of the New South Wales Young Nationals from 2008 to 2011, stepping down from both roles upon her election to Parliament. She's been the Minister for Education and Early Childhood Learning since April 2019. I've had the pleasure of working with the Minister as convener of the New South Wales Vice-Chancellors on a number of issues, and I can tell you a very dedicated, hard-working and very engaged Minister. Please welcome Minister Mitchell.
a bit shorter, so I'll move that down. Thank you, Barney. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and to you and to Peter and everybody for hosting us here today. It's a really exciting event, and thank you for the opportunity. I also, of course, want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and of course extend that respect to any or all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us today, particularly those who educate or who are being educated in our classrooms each and every day across New South Wales. It's very exciting to be at a keynote speech about education but not having to give the keynote speech. That doesn't happen all that often to me, so I'm excited that the Premier is joining us soon. They tell me that he will be here shortly, and I know that you will all enjoy hearing from the Premier today and his visions around education in New South Wales. Can I say that this is a policy area that I know Dom is incredibly passionate about. We have some robust and frank discussions around education policy in this state, and if I'm going to be the warm-up act for anybody, I'm very happy to do so for the Premier, because he is someone who I admire and I respect, not just as the Premier of this state, but also as a colleague and a friend. And I know that we both share that passion for a better world for our children and for every child in New South Wales, and I'm sure that you will enjoy hearing him speak today. Can I also say, looking around the room, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in education, many people who I've worked with in different roles over the last few years, and having everyone in a room together is still nice post-COVID. I still need to say that, looking out at a sea of faces. One of the things that I find so interesting when it comes to education, and particularly education policy, is the universality of education, by which I mean that everybody has had their own experiences in the education system, both positive and negative, which we can't help but reference and extrapolate from. And it certainly makes my job one of the most interesting, but also one of the most rewarding going around. But it is also infinitely challenging at the same time. So in my opening remarks today, there are three key areas, or pillars, if you will, that I want to speak to, particularly those that have driven my work as Minister for Education and Early Learning, and also the focus of our government over the last few years. And I think that these are all three areas that, no matter where we come from in terms of the education sector, it's something that we should all be able to agree on. The first of these pillars is the early years, and this is a real passion area for me. I met recently with a well-known education journalist here in New South Wales, and she said to me, your face just lights up when you talk about the early years, because it is just so important. And in a room like this, I know I can say that, and say that knowing that I would have agreement with everybody sitting here, because for me, I've had the early learning portfolio now for 5 years. Every single year that I've been the minister responsible for early childhood in New South Wales, I've actually had a child in the early learning system. So my girls are 9 and 4, so I am a mum as well as being a minister, and I really see with my own children how important it is to get those early years right, and what it means when you can get that early intervention and support. And that's something that I certainly bring to my role as the minister, because it's that power of a quality early education to unlock successful futures for our young people. And indeed, I think as Minister for Education, every investment that we make in the early learning part of my portfolio has a direct positive correlation for our children when they start school, go into primary school and onto secondary school. We know that children, for instance, who get their developmental checks, who engage with a high quality preschool program in that year before school at a minimum, they start school more ready, they're more prepared, they socialise better with their peers, they perform better once they begin school, and they're less likely to have interactions with the criminal justice system, they're more likely to have better lifelong social and employment outcomes. So the early years matter, and every dollar that we invest in a government in the early years makes such a positive change to the lives of young people. And I know that the Treasurer, Matt Keane, is also firmly in agreement in that particular position, because every $1 invested in early childhood education actually delivers a $2 boost to the New South Wales economy. That's a stat that I was very happy to take to the table in ERC when we needed more money for the early years portfolio. And that's probably a good segue into the amount of investment that we're seeing in early childhood education. When I first took on that portfolio back in 2017, the budget that we had was $372.2 million. But every year, investment in the early years has grown over the past couple of years, culminating in this year's budget, where I was absolutely thrilled to stand beside the Premier and the Treasurer and announce a historic investment in early childhood, in children, in families, and our economic future in New South Wales. It's an early years commitment worth $15.9 billion over the next 10 years. So $372 million a few years ago, We're now at $15.9 billion, which is a number that shocks me even now when I say it out loud. And can I say as a minister, it's not often that you leave an expenditure review committee meeting smiling. Normally treasurers are pretty good at saying no to all the things that you want. But on that particular occasion, it was really good to make sure that we were having that investment in our young people. And I would also, in doing that, call out the Premier, because whether it was during his time as Treasurer or, of course, now his time as Premier, he has been an absolute backer of providing that support, of providing funding to families and early childhood education and care services, because he has absolutely been a champion of the early years and backing in the kind of landmark commitment that we were able to make in the budget this year. We know that this is an investment that comes at a critical time. COVID, of course, has had an impact on all of us, but particularly our youngest students who miss so much in those early years before they started school. Some of our children who are now in the early years of primary school have had a very unsettled start to their education, and we need to make sure that we're investing to ensure that we don't see long-term impacts of that really challenging time. The early years commitments build on 4 building blocks: driving down the cost of early childhood education and care for our families, increasing access to early childhood education and care with those support services in place so that we can improve the quality and offer more places for families who need them, enhancing education, health and social service support in those crucial first 2,000 days of a child's life, with government agencies working together, which is really nice to see. When that happens and it happens well, we see the outcomes for our children. And finally, making sure that we attract and retain our early childhood teachers and educators and recognise the vital work that they do right across the state as well. Another landmark part of our budget was, of course, our universal pre-kindergarten commitment, something that I've been passionate about for many, many years now, especially after I visited Canada a few years ago and saw their full-day kindergarten program being offered to 4- and 5-year-olds across 5 days a week. Now, over in Canada, 90% of 4-year-olds and 95% of 5-year-olds participate in the program. And the studies show that their learning is already improving, their social and academic skills are getting better, and we're also seeing a boost in parents' workforce participation over, particularly in Ontario, and that's the system that we are looking to emulate and improve upon. It's important to also say that universal pre-kindergarten won't be another year of school. It's a play-based preschool program focusing on cognitive, social and emotional development in that critical year before school so that our children can build those connections, they can transition to school as seamlessly as possible, and for our primary school principals and educators to really know that every child who's going to walk in the front gate on that first day of kindergarten has had that year of quality learning, has had their full suite of developmental checks, has had early intervention and support, and we know that that will be a game changer for us in this state. We're looking forward to, as we work closely with our early childhood sector, of course, our learning experts, our parents, our primary schools, and the wider community as we deliver this model across New South Wales, and it's a really exciting policy piece that I'm proud to have been a part of delivering. The second pillar that I want to speak about is evidence-based policy. And I didn't actually know, Peter, that you were going to talk about that in your remarks as well, but I think it ties in quite nicely. Because for me, I have to say, after almost 4 years now in this portfolio, I can tell you that debate rages in education on a number of issues. Whether it's class sizes, classroom design, technology, standardised testing, naming just a few, I can tell you that I've heard them all and I've heard all sides of the arguments. But that also doesn't mean that we should shy away from tough decisions or from big investments. What it means, I think, for us as a government is that the bar is set really high when it comes to ensuring that we deliver evidence-based policies that we know will have an impact on student outcomes. And there's a lot of examples I could call out, but today I want to focus on one that I think is incredibly important, which is phonics. There is no more important skill for our children than to learn how to read. It is absolutely fundamental in every area of education. But when beginning to read, we know that children have to break that code of written language, which is known as decoding. And when spelling, they need to be able to use that code to turn their speech into written words, which is referred to as encoding. Early phonics knowledge is the key to starting to decode those written words, and therefore it is completely essential when it comes to early reading and spelling success. So we announced new commitments from our government to phonics assessment and instruction back in 2020. And it wasn't taking a chance, it wasn't placing a bet on phonics, it was a policy no-brainer as far as I was concerned, because there was strong, indisputable evidence from both here in Australia and overseas, which has demonstrated the importance of phonics for literacy teaching in the early years of school. When educators introduce children to sound letter patterns through engaging and explicit instruction, it makes the transition to early reading and spelling so much smoother. When you couple that with vocabulary instruction, you have those key ingredients for literacy success in the early years. And again, you'll probably see a bit of a common theme here in terms of my passion for the early years. But certainly when presented with the evidence that the best results in reading for our students occur when phonics is explicitly and systematically taught before moving on to other forms of reading instruction, to me, I didn't hesitate to act. And I'm really pleased to be able to share with you all today that we're already starting to see the dividends from this policy decision. So the analysis of the 2021 phonics data showed that we had 57% of Year 1 students meeting or exceeding the expected target. And that is up from just 43% when the check was trialled back in 2020. Pleasingly, the percentage of Aboriginal students who met or exceeded their expected achievement score increased from 18.4% in 2020 up to 29% in 2021. Now, I know that that's still a far way off 100%, of course, but I think the growth that you see literally in 1 year of development and 1 year of delivery of that phonics-based approach is a really positive sign of things to come. And again, for me, it just makes it very clear that when you follow a good evidence base and put that into practice in education policy, we will lead the state, we will lead the nation in terms of what we can deliver for our students and their outcome. I think sometimes it's also important to make sure that you don't get too distracted by the debates, even though that's easy to do. And, you know, a lot of people on social media have very clear views about some of the decisions that I make, but that's all part and parcel of the job. But making sure that as Education Minister, if I put evidence at the heart of all of my decision making, it's the right thing to do. So the final thing that I just want to briefly touch on before the Premier joins us is, again, something that I would hope that we can all agree on in one form or another. I don't want to speak too much about this because I believe that the Premier is intending to cover this in his address, and it might be a bit career limiting if I do steal his thunder. But it's about the pursuit of excellence. And we have a motto here in public education in New South Wales that we want to see every child, every teacher and every school improve each and every year. That, to me, is excellence. It's a system that is growing, that is improving and is adapting every year. And not just in terms of educational outcomes, although of course that has to be central, but also in terms of student wellbeing and engagement, in terms of school operations and service delivery. The pursuit of excellence is driving our once-in-a-generation curriculum reforms. These have already delivered brand new syllabuses for kindergarten to Year 2 English and Maths, and we have a number of other syllabuses out for consultation and many more to come. The pursuit of excellence also underpins the school success model, which I introduced back in 2020 as a way to more clearly set targets for individual schools and our systems as a whole, but to use those provided targets and strategic support to make sure that we are helping schools when they need it and to holding everybody who works in the system accountable for that school improvement, for that excellence. It's important that we support our workforce, that we support our teachers, our principals, who do an amazing job day in and day out. One of the absolute privileges of my job is to visit schools. And the favourite thing that I like to do is not going for an event, it's not going to cut a ribbon, even though I'm a politician. It's when I go to a school on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:00 and I see what's happening in that school context, and I get to meet the students, speak to the staff, get a bit of a tour from the principal and actually hear from the ground what's happening, how we can better support that school, but also, you know, some of the insights into what's working and what's working well, because I see day in and day out that the pursuit of excellence is what our teachers strive for each and every day. They speak about the children in their classrooms as if they were their own. They know them. They know what they need to succeed. And they're the stories that we have to make sure that we tell. And in return, I'm very committed as a minister to making sure that we find ways to recognise, to reward and to retain our amazing teachers in New South Wales. We have some of the best in the world. There is no doubt about that. And there are ways that we want to reward that excellence in teaching practice. But again, the Premier will speak a little bit more about that when he addresses you all shortly. But I would, while I have the opportunity, I know that Professor Hattie is here in the room along with the teams from the Department of Education who have been working on our rewarding excellence policy. And I do just want to give them a shout out because what they've been doing is very tireless work. They're very dedicated and passionate about what they're doing to support us in this policy intention. And I just want to acknowledge them while I have the floor. Because one of the biggest frustrations in this portfolio is that, as I said, people don't often get to see that day-to-day excellence that is everywhere in our schools and everywhere in our education system. Sadly, a salacious or a scandalous story will more often than not get the media's attention rather than a story about good news, about a school that maybe exceeded its attendance targets, or created an after-school program to engage parents or carers, or had children who were the first in their family to finish Year 12 and get the HSC. These are amazing achievements that happen day in and day out at schools right across the state, and we need to make sure that we are continuing to tell these stories. Let me close by assuring you all, these stories are there. These things are real. We have made great strides in education and early learning in this state over the last decade, and I'm so confident that the reforms that we have put in place in recent years will continue to bear fruit in the years and in the decades to come. Whether it's through championing our landmark early years commitment, pushing for a clear evidence base in policy and decision making, urging us to always strive for excellence, the Premier has been absolutely instrumental in these reforms. I look forward to hearing from him shortly about what's next on the horizon for education in New South Wales. And can I thank you all for being here today for this wonderful event, and again to JMI for having us. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. It's worth just briefly reflecting on the three pillars. It was a great setting, I think, today for the conversation we're going to have. The early years and how critical they are, the economic boost, the $2 return on a dollar investment. It's a pretty compelling argument. Your commitment to evidence-based policy, and particularly around phonics, but more generally, and of course, the pursuit of excellence. Three great pillars to lead us into the next conversation. So while the Premier is going to make his way, not just yet to his seat, but he will be very, very shortly, we're going to, in fact, run a short video that is going to provide you with a bit more detailed information about the work of the James Martin Institute, and that will be a great scene setter for the conversation with the Premier. So we might just run our video.
Our society continues to evolve, becoming increasingly complex as it grows. Public policy making is adapting to keep step with this complexity. Introducing the James Martin Institute for Public Policy, a groundbreaking government-university partnership that is transforming how public policy is made. As an independent, research-led institute, our unique approach builds on a close partnership with government to bring academic experts into the early stages of policymaking. By creating a trusted environment, we can enable the contestability of ideas and neutralise vested interests. Our process of smart collaboration makes the James Martin Institute unique. Working in bespoke teams, we facilitate collaboration between government, universities, communities, and industry to maximise access to expert knowledge. By focusing on a specific challenge from the start, teams can both co-design and co-deliver relevant policy solutions that are ready for the real world. This also ensures a diverse range of voices and experiences come together to represent broad segments of society. It's about transforming public policy through smart collaborations that harness world-leading research. Find out more at jmi.org.au.
It's a great video. We should watch it over and over again, but we won't. What I'm going to suggest, while we have a few minutes, the Premier's just held up for a moment. Minister, would you like to take the stage with Professor Shergold, and I'll ask a few brief questions to you, just to set the scene. Yes, yes. So this will be interesting. Minister, thank you for your comments. I'm going to go to Professor. This is questions without notice, but we'll see how we go. Peter, first of all to you. Both you and the Minister referenced evidence-based policy around the importance of the James Martin Institute and the way in which the JMI can influence public policy in New South Wales. What about public policy at the national level and the role the James Martin Institute might be able to play? Do you want to tease that out?
Well, I think the principles that underlie the James Martin Institute are frankly principles that could support universities and governments working together across the nation. I just think this was, if you think about it, it is such a simple idea, but so profoundly important. And we've been talking about this for so long. it's great to actually see it's happening. The difficulty, I think, often is that university researchers don't get involved early enough in the public policy discussions. What they need to be is involved so that when the minister is setting out her framework and thinking, I really want to focus on the early years of learning, for example, it's at that stage that we can start to bring in university research, rather than what often happens where we're quite a long way along the policy track. And then we may turn to universities, usually, frankly, mediated by public servants, in order then to provide, if you like, the evidence for policy directions that have already been taken. So that, I think, is the key breakthrough here.
Thanks, Peter. Minister, your eyes did light up when you spoke about early learning. There's no doubt about it. And I think we should congratulate the government. When you annualise the investment, it's at least a 5-fold increase in investment. That's the order of magnitude here. I just wanted to touch on how important it is to have a whole of government approach to the early years, because education is crucial, learning is crucial, but surely there's much more that a government can do in those early years.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. So one of the key pillars of that investment is what we call brighter beginnings. Everything in government's got to have a name. So brighter beginnings, but it's not a bad one to have. And it's really been something where we've seen a number of government agencies come together, and I've had the privilege to lead it as the Education Minister, but I'll probably miss someone, but I know it's education, it's health, it's Department of Premier and Cabinet, DCJ, Aboriginal Affairs. Everybody's working together to look at those first 2,000 days. And what we've seen in the budget, there were landmark investments. And as I said, not just in increased access to early childhood education, but even simple things like that full suite of developmental checks, because everyone would be familiar, many in the room who are parents, the blue book that you get, and you're supposed to take your child when they're 4 or before they start school to do a full suite of developmental checks. I don't even know where my second daughter's blue book is. Please don't tell her that. But part of what we're doing with this is digitising the blue book, and we're also doing those suite of developmental checks in early learning services. So the idea will be we are partnering with New South Wales Health, and rather than have parents and families who are busy, who, sometimes maybe don't have time, or they might not be or feel particularly safe or comfortable in a certain setting, we want to bring the health experts to their children in the services where they attend. As we roll out universal pre-K, it will happen in our pre-kindergarten. So every child will have that full developmental check before they start school. At the moment, it's only about half our kids who are having that, and it's looking at things like vision, hearing, any behavioural or learning challenges, things that if you pick up early enough, you can actually make sure you've got the right supports in place. And as you know, much like you said, Peter, it's actually simple in theory. This is too, and it's lovely when government departments work together, because sometimes we get very good at being siloed. And I think that there will be opportunities with that Brighter Beginnings initiative to really see much better engagement across agencies, and making sure that families are actually put first and get the support that they need from government, no matter where they live and no matter what their circumstances might be.
Thank you, Minister Mitchell, and thank you, Professor Shergold. And while you return to your seats at the end of our Q&A session, I will invite the Premier to make his way into the room. And welcome, Premier. Great to have you with us. And we might just, so the Premier has a chance to also get an indication of the great work of the JMI. We might just run that little video again. Premier, while you're having a moment to reflect, let's run the JMI video one more time. That's a great video. I'd now like, again, no, Premier, no. I'd now like to introduce the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Dominic Perrottet, who'll deliver the inaugural James Martin Institute Oration, a headland speech on education in New South Wales. There will be an opportunity for questions following the Premier's speech, facilitated by the Chief Executive, Libby Hackett. I should say a few words about our 46th Premier of New South Wales. He grew up in Sydney's northwest, where he and his wife Helen live with their 7 children. Dom served as Finance Minister, then as Treasurer for almost 5 years. In both these roles, and as Premier, Dom has been a driving force for reform, establishing New South Wales' first Productivity Commission, Australia's first state-based debt retirement fund, and the Board of State and Territory Treasurers. He's the chair of the Council of the Australian Federation and remains a strong advocate for state-led productivity reform. Dom is passionate about Australian history and heritage. He's Australia's first millennial leader, is a sports fanatic and a fan of the West Tigers, not so good, and the Sydney Kings. And he loves, apparently, to cook up a storm when he smoke a barbecue. He is also a great supporter of Australia's universities, and particularly in New South Wales. I'd like to acknowledge that, Premier. We're looking forward to you returning to Parramatta next week for another big event very close by. Please welcome the Premier.
Thank you very much, Barney, and can I thank you for all the work that you've done through Western Sydney University, but also particularly the leadership role that you have played during the last 2 years. And I think the coordination between the government and the university sector, the state government particularly, during what was a very difficult time for our state, but particularly for universities, I think that partnership made a real difference to the challenges that we faced and that we overcame during that period of time. Can I thank Libby Hackett, the CEO of the James Martin Institute, and Peter Shergold, the chair, for the work that you do. And I am obviously a strong supporter of the James Martin Institute, and the greater the collaboration and engagement with institutes like the James Martin Institute drive better public policy development at a state and federal level. So thank you very much for the work that you've done in a very short period of time. And you heard earlier from the Education Minister, Sarah Mitchell. And she's a great education minister, incredibly passionate with a zeal for reform. And she's served in this role for over 3 years. And before that, as the early childhood education minister, so for over 5 in that space. And with young kids herself, she's got skin in the game. And it's great to have Sarah as part of our cabinet team here in New South Wales. Sarah, thank you for everything that you have done. And we'll go through, as part of this oration today, some of the work that Sarah particularly has led in our state in driving better outcomes for our kids' education. So there's a story about a boy from Parramatta. He was a gifted student and his parents wanted to nurture that gift, but there was no high school where he lived. The only real option was to travel 25 kilometres each and every day by horse and cart, but his family could not afford to do that. His dad was a horse groom, and he tried to find a school closer to home, but to no avail. So it all seemed pretty hopeless. But the boy knew that education was the key to unlocking a life away from the stables. So he told his father, "That's all right, I'll walk." And all the way from Parramatta to Sydney to get an education. Of course, that boy was James Martin. And the horse groom's son from Parramatta went on to become a journalist, a lawyer, the first locally trained Australian QC, Chief Justice, Attorney General, and Premier of our state. He was a giant of our modern nation's early story. And none of that would have been possible without schooling. James Martin never took his education for granted. He became a pioneer of public education in this country. And that passion for education is something that I share. Last year at the National Press Club, I signalled my intention to be an education premier, to modernise the education system and to reform it. So it's very fitting to be here at the James Martin Institute for Public Policy to talk about our plans to bring education in New South Wales into the 21st century and unlock the door of opportunity for the next generation of New South Wales students. Now, this is a matter of urgent necessity. At the National Skills Summit in Canberra a few weeks ago, leaders were presented with some confronting data showing a steady decline in national education outcomes over the past 2 decades. In reading literacy, the average achievement of Australian students in 2018 had fallen 9 months behind what students were achieving in the year 2000. In mathematics, nationally, students fell behind by more than a year. Other studies show similar results, and that is simply unacceptable. These results do not match the capabilities and the ambitions of our nation and its people. And this matters to me because I feel the same urgency as every parent, knowing that my children's success in the classroom will in many ways determine their success beyond the classroom. It also matters to me as a Liberal. My party was founded on the spirit of aspiration and social mobility. That is the essence of an egalitarian Australia where everyone, no matter where you are or who you are or where you're from, everyone has that great opportunity to get ahead. And education is the means of turning aspiration into prosperity, the key to unlocking the door of opportunity. But as well as being a dad, and as a Liberal, it is my role as Premier, and I feel the weight of responsibility, not just for my kids, but for an entire generation. Because I believe there is no more important task for a government than investing in the next generation. And there is no more important investment than education. And it is our moral duty for our kids to get it right. That duty is even more pressing in a rapidly evolving world. I recently visited Japan, India, and South Korea on a trade tour. 3 nations hungry to trade and engage with New South Wales in emerging industries like advanced manufacturing, clean energy production, medical technology, aerospace, and defence. Now, our state has competitive advantages in each of these areas, and I want them to be the driving force of our next economic boom, and I want them to deliver highly skilled, high-paid jobs for our children in the years ahead. But to be frank, the nations that I visited are also our competitors. They want the same things for their children. So if we want our children to succeed, to compete at a global level, we have to set them up for that future now. If we want successful Australians tomorrow, we need successful students today. So that is my goal and my driving ambition: successful students. Success in the classroom, setting up success in the careers of the future. Today, my focus is on the policies that can achieve that outcome. But first, I want to make this point. Simply spending more money is not the solution. Obviously, funding is incredibly important. We were the first government to sign up to Julia Gillard's Gonski reforms. And that's one of the reasons why New South Wales has the highest per student expenditure for government school students. No government, state or federal, has ever invested more right across the board. But success is not measured in the size of the spend. Success is measured in the outcomes that are obtained. And if we want different outcomes, better outcomes, I believe we need to look at new ways of doing things. In fact, the best time to make substantive policy changes is when you've put those record investments in. We've secured the resources, and now we need new policies to drive better outcomes. Now, that process is well and truly underway. So let me run through some of the reform initiatives that we've already delivered. First, school infrastructure. This may be a staple of state government, but the government that preceded us showed if you don't have a plan, building infrastructure just won't happen. They closed 90 schools. We have built and upgraded 194, and we have 160 more in the pipeline at various stages of completion. North, south, east, west, from the city to the bush, everywhere you go, we aren't just building schools, we're building the best schools. They are modern learning environments that will give our students every chance of success. The next is curriculum reform. Over time, the number of types of subjects included in the school curriculum has expanded out of all proportion. Having a variety of subjects does give students choice, but the downside is a dangerous dilution of the fundamentals: maths, core sciences, history, and literature. So we conducted the first comprehensive curriculum review in 30 years, and we are simplifying and decluttering the curriculum, getting back to basics to give students the strongest foundations and clearer career pathways. I want more reading, writing, and arithmetic, and less puppetry, politics, and wearable art. And I don't want classrooms focused on superfluous and inherently divisive political issues that distract from the core subjects and skills our children need to learn. The first of the new syllabuses are rolling out next year, and all new syllabuses will be in place by 2024. The next is phonics, which our Education Minister has driven very strongly. We made phonics compulsory from K to 10, and we now conduct mandatory phonics screening checks from Year 1 students in all public schools. Now, the president of the Teachers Federation fought it tooth and nail. He said it was about politics and it wouldn't work. Well, it's already delivering better outcomes for our students. In the space of just 1 year, the percentage of Year 1 students meeting the expected achievement score has risen from 43% to 56.7%. We did something different and we're getting better results. The next is financial literacy. As Treasurer, I was shocked at the lack of explicit financial literacy teaching in our schools, which is an area of basic practical importance for our children's lives. So in 2021, we launched the Treasurer's Financial Literacy Challenge based on feedback from teachers on how we could fill that gap. The pilot was a huge success, delivering targeted resources to almost 7,000 students and 250 teachers from more than 200 schools. And so now we've refined the program based on the feedback we've received from teachers and from schools, and it will start again in October with updated resources and an even bigger pool of students. As part of our drive to lift school standards, we launched the Ambassadors Schools program. We identified 10 schools around the state that are achieving exceptional academic success. And we are partnering with university researchers to identify what makes these schools so successful, so we can apply those lessons learned in those schools to other schools so that all our students across the state can benefit. The next is flexible school hours. I've said from the outset, when I became Premier, I want my ministers to ask the question, why? If we offer a service designed simply around government and not around the people we serve, then we should look to change it. For many modern families, the idea of a 9 to 3 school day is completely out of touch with the reality of working families across our state. Well, I believe in creating an education system that genuinely meets families where they are. So in August this year, we commenced a landmark trial of flexible school hours, offering a range of extracurricular activities before 9 and after 3 to match the needs of working families. Once again, the New South Wales Teachers Federation opposed it, but the feedback that we've received from school communities that have been involved in this program has been overwhelmingly positive. Parents love it, students love it, and teachers love it. So we're taking on their feedback to make it better and make further extensions to it. Finally, in June, we announced a full year of pre-K learning for every child in this state by 2030, with trials to start next year. I believe this will be the greatest transformation of early childhood education in a generation. Because a child who gets 2 years of early childhood education before they start school walks into the classroom on average 8 months ahead of kids who do not. So a year of pre-K is a game changer for our students' future success, and that is that direct link between their educational ability when they start school and their academic prospects and earning capacity later in life. And I particularly, again, want to thank the Education Minister, and before her in that role as early Education Minister, because I was Treasurer at the time when we delivered all of those budgets, where she would prosecute the case for expanding the various programs we had in pre-K education. She won, I lost, and now we have a much better system, which has led to the reform that we learnt from during those periods of time to then partner with the Victorian government in rolling out what I believe will be one of the most substantial education reform in our country's history. These reforms represent real progress. But a reform mindset means that policy must continue to evolve. So my focus today is on the next phase. What the next tranche of reforms we put together have in common are all about raising our collective expectations. They address the needs of all 3 key stakeholders in education policy: students, teachers, and parents. Because I want our education system and our students to be exceptional in every single way possible. And while the community often focuses on the divide between the different school systems, public, private, independent, and Catholic, I believe students and parents should be able to expect the highest educational outcomes no matter what school they are in. So our strategy will raise expectations to drive greater student success. Now for students, the two new points that the Minister and I are focusing on are wellbeing and respect. In our schools today, 1 in 7 children report mental health issues, which some studies suggest is triple the rate experienced by baby boomers. We are raising a generation that has already endured a pandemic, and they are the first generation to live their entire lives with the internet and social media. Now, recently, we have seen the ugly side of that in some of our schools. So our government is taking important steps to address this generational wellbeing challenge. In 2015, we introduced the first support officers in schools that needed them most. In 2020, we committed $88 million to provide every public high school with a counsellor and a student support officer. And just a few days ago, we announced a landmark partnership with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute to study the post-pandemic mental health and wellbeing of younger students. The other side of the wellbeing coin is classroom behaviour and respect at school. When students are held to reasonable standards of behaviour and respect, they perform better and are happier. And one of the most celebrated examples of this is the Macaulay School in the UK, where a rigorous culture of high expectations, high behavioural standards, and back to basics teaching have propelled disadvantaged students to extraordinary achievement. I want the same outcomes for our kids, and there isn't a mum or dad across this state who's not concerned about what's happening in their children's classroom. Because the reality is, just one student misbehaving in the classroom or not being given the support that they need affects every other child's educational opportunities. So we will introduce 3 new measures to increase respect in our schools. We will appoint a chief behavioural advisor working across all 3 school sectors to advise and support schools and maintaining high standards of behaviour and respect. We'll also more than double the number of behavioural specialists in our public high school system from 75 to 200. And we'll institute the New South Wales Premier's Respect Awards to champion the best role models of behaviour and respect amongst our students. If we can lift student wellbeing and lift respect at school, we'll be enabling children and teachers to focus on what matters most: successful learning in the classroom. Now, every day, in thousands of classrooms across our state, our teachers are doing an exceptional job. And like every parent, I want and expect excellence from our teachers. But there is a fundamental problem holding them back, because we currently have a system in which the best teachers and the worst teachers are for the most part paid and treated the same. A system that pushes great teachers out of the classroom and into administrative or management roles because that's where they can get the best pay. It doesn't make sense. Teachers choose teaching because they love to teach, not to become middle managers or administrators. When I spoke to principals along with the Minister from our ambassador schools earlier this year, I asked them if they could change one thing, what would it be? Every single one of them said less admin. So we took that on board, and starting next week, we will trial more than 200 new administrative staff in our school system. I don't want teachers tied up in red tape. I want them focused on what they do best and what they love, and that is teach, not pushing paper. When teaching is the focus, we know, everyone here knows, that great teachers change lives. I remember 2 teachers in particular who made a real difference to my education. One was quite traditional, the other was quite freewheeling. But both, in their own way, gave me the gift of a real appreciation and a love for great literature. That's the kind of impact that teachers really cherish. So it makes sense to incentivise that. I don't want teachers leaving the profession because they've been faced with the choice of stagnating in their career or moving into management. I believe we should have a system where teaching is valued, supported, and shared with other teachers, a system grounded by rewarding teaching excellence. Now, I won't pretend that there is a simple solution here. Previous attempts, often framed around performance pay, haven't yielded results. But just because others have failed in the past, that does not excuse us to stop trying. So today, we take the first step towards rewarding teaching excellence in New South Wales. I want to see the creation of high-performance teaching positions in schools right across our state. For example, a particular school might need a high-performing history teacher for senior students or a high-performing numeracy teacher for foundational learning, depending on the school's circumstance. These roles will be rolled out across the state and attract a higher salary to attract the very best candidates. This would be a system where no teacher goes backwards, but the best teachers go forwards, further, and faster. Our goal is to establish a clear pathway for high-performing teachers that offers a fair reward for all their effort and skill. The reform is being led by Professor John Hattie, and it builds on existing policies to lift the quality of teaching in New South Wales. We have committed to making classroom assessment of teachers objective and independent. Otherwise, classroom observation risks being a tick-in-the-box exercise that doesn't actually help teachers improve. If we want teachers to be the best, they have to be assessed the best way as well. We shouldn't shy away, and no profession shies away from professional assessment. And we should be doing the same in teaching. We should embrace it like every other serious profession, and we should use it to help teachers progress in their careers. We also have a number of programs to attract great teachers to the profession, including a fully tailored Teach for Australia program that meets our rigorous accreditation requirements. And looking ahead, I can see value in the approach that some Catholic schools have taken to teacher development with a program called Catalyst. By working with teachers one-to-one, schools are sharing best practice methods among teachers and making sure that every teacher is equipped with the tools to excel. The teachers in this program have welcomed the chance to upgrade their skills, and students are benefiting from high-quality teaching and consistency through schooling life. It's another reform opportunity that I look to exploring in the future, because nothing is more important to student success than the quality of the teaching they receive, and that will be my top priority. Now, of the three education stakeholders, the group that receives the least attention is parents. Many parents find it hard to engage with their children's education, and government has not made that easy. And this has to change because research shows that when parents are engaged, educational outcomes improve across every single age group. But we have to apply this knowledge with an understanding of the challenges that modern families are facing across our state. Parents are busy. With 7 of them, I know. The vast majority, 70% of 2-parent families with dependents currently have both parents in the workforce. It's hard enough packing lunches, remembering carnivals, making book week costumes, helping with the homework, weekend sport, weekday sport, and all those school activities. And at the same time, you're juggling work and you're juggling the household. So being more engaged with our children's education is not easy. And yet, a lot of parents want to be more engaged. A lot of parents want a better idea of what's happening in the classroom. And parents have a right to know. But I don't want to add to their workload. I want to make it easier for them. Parents shouldn't have to come to us. We should go to them. And so we're going to make it easy and send parents a copy of the curriculum at the start of every year. Our high schools will also share the texts of key learning areas. Parents don't have to read it. It's not homework for them. But if parents want to, they will have the information about what their child is learning at their fingertips. I also want the education department to be more engaged with parents, not less. Throughout a child's schooling life, naturally issues, we've all gone through it, will arise, and parents will have concerns. It might be with a teacher, it might be with bullying by peers. It could be something their child is learning in the classroom. Now, in the first instance, we want those concerns to be resolved directly between parents, principals, and teachers. But we all know that sometimes that can't happen. So today I can announce the establishment of a parent advocacy team, an independent team within the department to provide an alternate avenue to help parents and students get the resolution that they need. This reform will help everyone involved. It will help students, parents, teachers, and principals. Parents place so much trust in government when they put their kids in our classrooms, so they have a right to know what's happening in them. And we have a duty in government to be accountable, to be transparent, to meet families where they are and help them get the very best for their kids' education. So when you bring all of this together, this is a new trajectory for education in our state. A successful student strategy brimming with new ideas to get better results. We're building world-class learning environments. We're getting back to basics with the curriculum. We're introducing flexible school hours. We'll fund a full year of pre-K education. We're improving respect in classrooms. We'll create high performance pathways to reward excellence in teaching and make teacher assessment objective and independent to lift teacher quality. And we're making it easier for parents to engage, supporting better outcomes for their kids. These are the foundations of an education system rigorously focused on student success. But this is not the end. Reform does not mean set and forget. Policy must continue to evolve as we meet the needs of students and parents where they are and build a modern education system built for the 21st century. As I said, I want to be an education premier. So I'll be saying a lot more along with the minister in the weeks and the months ahead. Our government will keep daring to do things differently to set up our students for a lifetime of success in the classroom and beyond. Thanks very much.
Premier, do come and join me briefly. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was excellent. My name is Libby Hackett. I'm the Chief Executive of the James Martin Institute for Public Policy. It is my privilege to thank you, Premier, on behalf of the Institute for delivering our first oration. Thank you. You've set out a bold, ambitious and comprehensive vision for the future of education in New South Wales. And of course, in doing so, there is such an intrinsic link to the future success and prosperity of the state as a whole, more broadly. You've also set a very high bar for our future orations. So thank you so much for that. We appreciate it very much. So whilst I give the audience a moment to think about some questions they might like to ask the Premier, I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question, if that's okay. So we've been hearing a lot this morning about evidence-based policymaking. As you know, the Institute was set up as a conduit or bridge, if you like, between academic experts, wider experts, and public policymakers in government. And we have the privilege of working closely with you and your colleagues across New South Wales Government. My question is to you, what is your view on the role of experts in public policymaking? And in preparing for today's announcements, there are some big policy announcements there. How have you engaged with experts in doing that, Premier?
Well, I think experts, Libby, play a very important role. The minister, through her team, engaged Professor Hattie in relation to rewarding excellence in schools. And I think think tanks like the James Martin Institute and others play a very crucial role in looking at new ways of doing things, learning from jurisdictions that have had success in other countries, and looking at how we can adopt those policies here in our state. I also think we can't be afraid of getting it wrong. And if you don't look at new ways of doing things and trial new ways of doing things, then you can't go forward. And my experience, whether it's in education policy or any other area of government, when you come up with change, there is naturally always resistance. There's a love of doing things the way we always have. It's like a romanticism that's attached to it. And that's okay, But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look outside the box and do different things. And one thing that I've learned in the time, either as finance minister and treasurer and now as premier, is that if you start small and you give something a go, if you look at evidence from experts and overseas, and you start small, and if that's successful, you expand it, then I think that's where you get the better outcomes. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're not putting extra burden, particularly in education policy, on teachers. I think the key thing, as I said in my speech, that it's not just learning from experts, it's learning from teachers themselves. They're the ones at the coalface. They're the ones who Sarah and I sit down with and can say, well, here's where the problems are, and we can address that. And I found that very informative with Sarah, sitting down and understanding, particularly on admin, well, let's address that. Let's get you into the classroom. Let's get you teaching. But the other point I'd say, Libby, is the trials that we have run have been incredibly successful. And if, whether it's in education policy, I still remember small things. I was finance minister, and we announced the establishment of a digital driver's license program. The entire place went into meltdown, right? Like, well, what are you going to do if your phone goes dead? I was like, well, what happens if you lose your wallet? And the point was, you make it about choice. If you give choice to people, it's very difficult for scare campaigns to be run. We've done the same thing with our flexible school hours, starting small. Same thing with the financial literacy that we brought in a couple of years ago. You start small, you learn from it. If it works, you expand it. And if it doesn't, you get rid of it. And governments shouldn't be scared of making mistakes. We should embrace making mistakes and learning from them, but also learning where things work, look at. And I think institutes like James Martin and others play a key role, and particularly also with Barney here, the university sector, in informing governments of new ways we should be looking at driving educational excellence.
Thank you. Brave, evidence-based policymaking. We like it. So, questions from the audience, please. We have some time for a few questions. My colleagues are walking around with roaming mics. So there's Francis and Yvonne will bring a microphone to you. I'll ask for 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then I will put those to the Premier, please. So, hands up, anybody who would like to ask a question to the Premier. Okay, wonderful. Gillian, thank you.
Thank you so much, Premier. We should call you Education Premier. Could I just ask, Gillian Siegel from the John Monash Foundation. Could I ask you, though, a question not really directed from the Monash Foundation, but in relation to your point about respect? Because it's obviously a very key issue for all of us, not only about the future of individuals, but it's the future of the nation, that we build up a nation of those who respect each other. It's our culture. And we've seen many examples recently in the media of lack of respect in the school grounds, where students have not had respect for other students, other nationalities, other religious followers, etc. And we fear that that has come from social media. So I wondered if you could expand a little bit on what you see as the initiatives in relation to respect, because it actually affects the future of the state as well as the nation, and where you might be seeking some more expert input into that. Because there are many seeking to have input, and I would suggest to you that it's also something to trial and learn from, etc., because we all have a vested interest in seeing more respect amongst not only high school but junior school students.
Look, that's a great question, and the first point I'd make on that, and over the course of this week, in fact, I was in a press conference with Sarah yesterday or the day before when we were asked these questions about putting in behavioural specialists in schools and setting up, advisor within government. And I was standing in the press conference, and there was a lot of negativity that was being raised about respect with kids in schools. And just standing there reflecting on it, I think we need to take a step back and say, this is not a unique issue to children. Social media is driving a less respectful culture right across the world. And as adults and as parents, we are the ones that have an obligation of actually driving a more respectful workplace and culture across the board. We can hardly expect our kids to treat people and students with respect if we have adults not treating people with respect as well. And prior to social media, you would generally have an environment where people raise issues face to face. And over time, and humanity has developed where you would do so in a more respectful way, not all the time, but social discourse is provided that generally people in a face-to-face environment treat people with respect. Now, what social media has done through that detachment from face-to-face is create a culture and an environment where it's not an Australian issue, it's a global issue, that people are just becoming less respectful of each other and not engaging in a way that is appropriate. So that simply trickles down, obviously, to the school environment. Now, we need to address that as a society as a whole, but particularly in a school environment. We've seen success in things, again, that we've trialed, like our counselling services for mental health in schools, which Sarah implemented, and behavioural specialists to identify where there are concerns with a student's behaviour in the classroom that perhaps the teacher or the principal is unable to address, that we can provide that support. I was asked questions in that press conference because it's right across Catholic and independent schools as well, whether Catholic schools or independent schools could reject that request for assistance. Well, it's not about whether they have that support or it's not. It's about us as a government providing those specialist services to help kids. Kids aren't disrespectful for the sake of it. There's probably a myriad of reasons. And if we can provide direct intervention and care and support for people, then we'll drive higher standards. And if we drive higher standards, just like a respectful workplace will get better outcomes, respectful environment in classrooms will get better outcomes. And our teachers also want this. We've heard that feedback loud and clear. If there's a child with a challenging behavior in the classroom, that affects the teacher and it affects the learning of all our students. So setting up the new position within the department, that will help coordinate all of that. And we've based that off something that we learned in the UK. Now, once again, we'll roll this out. And that will probably teach us other things that we can implement across the board. But I certainly believe that creating a respectful environment in schools, which in the main is there, but if we can continue to enhance it and promote it, that's going to drive better educational outcomes. But let's not forget that we shouldn't be tutting at kids when we read those reports in the newspapers, because they come out and everyone's branded with the same brush. It's not true. And if anything, the behaviour that needs to change needs to be driven from the top, and that's adults in the way that they behave and engage on social media.
Thank you, Premier. It's an excellent question. Thank you. We're very short on time. In fact, we've run far over time, but I would like to have the opportunity for one more last question, please. Emma, yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. Emma Johnson, I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research at the University of Sydney. In the higher education sector, we see these increasing turns towards digital literacy and the need for computer science literacy and numerical literacy, and most of our research becoming more complex in that area. We don't see the same kind of turn towards those subjects in the school system. I'm wondering what the plan is for the state to address that issue.
Well, Sarah won't want me to announce new policies here today. In fact, she's here just to keep an eye on me. But it's a very good question because, as I've said, education and policies need to evolve in a modern world. And one of the things that we've done, particularly in the vet sector, is engage TAFE a lot more with with our high school education system, and with the rise of digital technology and the rise of where those future jobs are going to be based. It's not just our university education system that needs to adjust and change and evolve. So does our high school and primary school system. And people get concerned particularly about digital access in schools, we shouldn't be scared of that. We should be embracing it and harnessing the opportunity for our kids in those areas. So the 2 points I'd make here is, one of the things we've got to focus, which we focused on, has been the decluttering of the curriculum. And that was important because it expanded over time in areas that weren't as essential. And that's made it harder for teachers in terms of learning a whole range of other areas that they've got to teach their children. And Sarah's done a great job in decluttering non-essential areas of in courses in secondary schools by 20% last year, and we'll hit, I think, close to 80% this year. But it's also about focusing on adding those areas in the curriculum that will drive opportunities where future jobs will be based. And I do believe, and obviously it's great to have the Sydney University here, the greatest university, and the university sector involved, because I think for too long universities have always been seen to be in the federal sphere. Well, I've certainly learned over the last couple of years the real importance of the university sector to the state, and the collaboration that we can have together will help, I believe, drive and inform those subject areas that students can eventually take to the HSC, that will then be able to be expanded on at a university level. So it's the partnership that I think will only grow, and it might be something that we identify at a school level, or it might be something that you identify at a university level, that here are the courses that we are looking at taking on because we see the great opportunity for jobs growth in this space. And how do we work with the Department of Education to add subjects that will help inform our students and set them up for success at university in those courses. So the real answer to your question is the partnership between education and state government and the university sector, I think, is only going to grow as we live in, as our society continues to evolve at a rapid rate.
Thank you, Premier. That's a partnership that's very close to our hearts at the Institute. So thank you all. This is wrapping up. This is all we've had time for today, I'm afraid. Premier, thank you again for setting out such a bold and ambitious vision for New South Wales education, something that is clearly evidence-driven and inspiring for future generations. So thank you. I'd also like to thank Minister Mitchell for her remarks. Minister Mitchell, you are a true education minister, and we are so thankful for you. So thank you so much. I'd also like to thank our audience. Thank you for attending and participating, particularly those who have stood throughout. Thank you ever so much. We're delighted that you're with us today. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to thank our partners. I'd like to thank the New South Wales Government, Western Sydney University, the University of Sydney, and UTS. And particular thanks go to Professor Glover and Western Sydney University today for hosting us in such superb environment and surroundings. Thank you. A recording of this event, it will be available on our website, on the JMI website, where you can also register to find out about future events. And as the formalities come to a close, we invite you to join us for a light lunch in the lobby outside. Thank you so much. Thank you once again. I hope you've enjoyed the oration. Thank you, Premier, and we will see you all over lunch. Thank you.